Good morning, Eights. Mr.Westra here with Half Brother 24, part number 1. Just to remind you of where we've been. So last reading, we found out that Zan had been sold to a university in Nevada called Siegel University. We also find out that Peter is going with Zan to the university in Nevada. And it was a description of Zan's last few days at their home. And Zan made his last sign, which was his name. So here we go. We're going to start part 3 today. The sign for love is very similar to hug. You just cross your wrists and place them over your heart. That was not a word on our teaching lists. It never got written on the big wall chart in our kitchen. We dressed Zan in our clothes and fed him our food and let him sleep in our beds. We told him to call us Mom and Dad and Brother. He lived with us and trusted us, and we lied to him every day. We fooled him into thinking we were his real family and that we could always love him and take care of him. We did this so he'd perform his tricks for us. But later, when his tricks weren't useful anymore, we locked him in a cage and got rid of him. Chapter 19. Dr. Helson. Trying to pack for Zan when he was around was hopeless. I'd put some of his favorite things in his suitcase, and he'd come and grab them out and run off, wanting me to catch him and tickle him. In the end, we had to wait till he was asleep, and then I moved through his room like a thief, selecting him things. On his bed, he was all wrapped up in his favorite blanket, with his pig and his cow and his G.I. Joe action figure. For a few seconds, I tried to wiggle them away so I could pack them, but in the end, I just gave up and settled down beside him and slept the night there. The next day at lunchtime, when Mom put the tranquilizer in Zan's milk, she started to cry, and she couldn't stop. Dad was worried she might upset Zan, and he wouldn't drink the bottle, so he told her to go upstairs. Nearly 2 years ago, they tranquilized Zan's mother so Mom could take Zan. Now she was putting him to sleep so she could abandon him. Dad finished pouring the milk into the bottle, gave it a good shake, and passed it to me. "Why don't you give it to him, Ben?" "You do it," I said. "It's your show, Doctor." His eyes had so little warmth. He offered the bottle, and Zan took it and drank eagerly, pausing only right at the beginning, probably because he noticed the taste. He must have thought it was weird we hadn't put him in his high chair first, so he climbed up onto me and drank his bottle on my lap. I held him close, looked over the top of his head, and felt like a traitor. I held him till he finished, and held him as he got very quiet and still. He fell asleep in my arms. I held him, The doctor had given him a big dose. It was supposed to be totally safe, and we would keep him asleep for 8 hours, just to make sure we had a backup dose packed for the flight. "Let's go," Dad said. Mom came down, her eyes all red and swollen, and we got into the Mercedes. We'd packed our own bags the night before, too, and they were all ready in the back. The drive to the airport didn't take long. No public airline wanted a chimp bouncing around, so the university had to pay for a private plane, the last of Project Zan money. The plane was waiting on the tarmac. It was little, with 2 propellers and not much room in the cabin. A little door separated us from the pilots in the cockpit. Mom held Zan in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. No one talked much. It was my first time on an airplane, and I should have been excited, checking everything out, but I didn't enjoy it. After we took off, I looked out the window and saw the island, and then the water, and then we climbed above the clouds, and it was like we were in some nowhere land. About an hour into the flight, it got really bumpy, and though I was scared, part of me thought it would be good if we crashed, because at least we'd all be gone together. And then I wouldn't have to hand over Zan and say goodbye, and see the look in his eyes as he realized we were leaving him behind. My mind kept shutting down then. I couldn't think beyond that moment. It was like nothing could possibly exist afterwards. The plane didn't crash, and a couple of hours later, we landed in Nevada. I carried Zan down the steps to where Peter was waiting for us beside a station wagon. It was really good to see Peter. He'd arrived the week before and was getting settled. "Dr. Tomlin," he said, shaking Dad's hand. "Sarah." "Hey, Ben, how's Sleepyhead?" "He's all right," I said. "Still out cold, eh? Okay, let's get you guys out to the ranch." Ranch. That sounded good. Big and clean and wholesome. The people who worked there would all love animals and just want to take care of them as best they could. So it's going to be a bit of a change for Zan, Peter said as he pulled onto the highway. I just want to warn you, it's certainly been a change for me. It was sunny and hot, but I didn't care about what was outside the car windows. Didn't care about the desert, or the cactuses, or the bird song. Zan, warm in my arms. This will go easier for Zan if we act as normal as possible, Dad said. In the back seat, I shook my head in disgust. Maybe Dad could do it, because he didn't feel as much as me. He never had. Mum looked out the window, silent. The plan was we were going to stay 5 days to help Zan settle in. Dr. Helson had been against it. He'd said a clean break, cold turkey, was the best way to do it. Don't drag it out. But Mum had insisted, and Dad had backed her up. We'd booked a motel on the outskirts of town and would spend the days at the ranch with Zan. I got to miss a week of school. How do you find working with Dr. Helson? Dad asked Peter. He's very... Peter paused. He knows a lot about chimps. He's been working with them a long time. And Zan will have company here, which is really good. Chimps form pretty close bonds. All I could think about was how we'd torn apart the only bonds Zan had ever formed in his life. Twice. Outside, a long country road lined with power poles, going on forever. The land looked hard and dry, but there were a few trees and shrubs close to the ground and kind of scraggly looking. We're just coming up on it here, Peter said, and turned onto a dirt road. There was a little rise, and then I could see the chain-link fencing, topped with tilted rows of razor wire. I felt a lump in my throat. There's a lot of land, Peter said, so Zan will have plenty of space outside. I've been talking to Dr. Helson about building a kind of elevated playground for them. You know, poles with rope bridges and platforms they can climb. More like a natural forest environment. There were more trees and brushes now, and we were coming up on what looked like a farm. I saw a couple of barns, then a large concrete building with large barred windows on all sides. Beyond that was a pretty farmhouse with a white veranda and picture windows. It looked like something from a storybook. Old MacDonald had a farm. It was late afternoon, the light starting to slant beautifully on the buildings and trees, making long shadows across the ground. We parked on the gravel drive, and the moment I opened the car door, I heard the chimps. That's the main colony, Peter said, nodding at the big concrete building. There are 13 of them right now, feeding time by the sound of it. I'd heard Zan make a ruckus when he was having a temper tantrum, but he was only one little chimp. The sound of so many chimpanzees together made my knees weak. They sounded big, and they sounded powerful, and suddenly I felt like I didn't know anything about chimps at all. I didn't want to go in there. Luckily, out from the pretty farmhouse, an entire family was coming to meet us. A man and a woman and 2 kids, a girl about my age and a boy about 10 or so. Mum was carrying Zan now, still fast asleep. I grabbed his suitcase. I saw Peter glance at it and look kind of sick, but he didn't say anything. Richard, said the man, striding towards Dad with his hand outstretched. Jack Helson, welcome. Helson was tall and thin, but broad-shouldered. With his sleeves rolled back, his forearms seemed way bigger than they should have been, all bulgy muscle and vein. He had close-cropped hair, a high forehead, and very intense green eyes. He didn't look very much like a professor to me. He looked like a soldier. Introductions were made out there on the gravel driveway, and then he asked us to come inside and have dinner. What a little sweetheart, said Dr. Helson's wife, Barbara, looking at Zan. He's a good size. He's a good eater, Mum said. Bring him inside, Dr. Helson said. Lord knows our house is no stranger to baby chimps. I liked the way he called Zan a baby, like he was something vulnerable and worth taking special care of. Mrs. Helson said, he'll probably start to rise in an hour or 2, and then we'll get him settled. The other chimps will be sleeping by then. She was big-boned and had a pleasant face. I knew from Peter that she was a vet, so she was a doctor too, really. The boy, Winston, looked like a miniature version of his dad, with a near-shaved head and piercing eyes. Sue Ellen, the girl, was sort of pretty, blonde and curvy, with a sunny smile. The Helson's house was nice. Their dining table was already set for us, and there were all sorts of prints hanging on the walls, historical etchings of apes and chimps. I saw Mum and Dad look at them appreciatively and could tell they thought Helson was a cultivated man. Sue Ellen brought out a playpen for Zan, and set it up in a corner of the dining room and expertly took Zan from Mum's arms and laid him down so he could sleep comfortably while we ate. I remembered that very first barbecue in Victoria, when Zan was just days old and everyone wanted to hold him and coo over him. For a weird moment, I felt like we were safe and all together, but I knew it was a lie. It was a good meal. Dr. Helson liked to cook, apparently, but I couldn't eat much. I kept glancing at Zan sleeping in his playpen, wondering where he was going to be spending the night. They're fabulous creatures, chimps, Dr. Helson was saying. Intelligent, empathetic, murderous too. They're no angels. Neither are we, said Mum. That's why we have so much in common, said Helson. But we're much, much smarter. The mistake is when we allow our human sentimentality to contaminate the experiments. I would agree, said Dad. Helson tapped his fork in the air. Our craving to anthropomorphize them is remarkable. Anthropomorphize. I'd heard Dad use that word before. What's it mean, I asked. Pretending animals are human, Sue Ellen said, giving me a smile, that they'll act just like us. Her father chuckled, and I can promise you they don't. But people have a great deal of trouble realizing this, especially with the young ones. Even the people who work with them. Fascinating psychological process to watch it happen. The delusion can be therapeutic for some. I do quite a bit of work in that area. I had no idea what he was talking about, and he didn't elaborate. He seemed to like looking at Mom an awful lot. He addressed most of his comments to her, and once I thought he was looking down her blouse. But of course, all babies grow up, and that's when the problems begin. Helson turned his gaze on me now. You've seen the movie 101 Dalmatians? I nodded. Well, that movie was popular, and the dogs were adorable, all those puppies. And apparently, after the movie came out, everyone wanted a Dalmatian. Now, as it turns out, these dogs have superabundant energy, and they're not the ideal house pet. They destroy houses, so people started getting rid of them in droves. Pounds were glutted with them. I suspect many were put down. Fantasy can be a dangerous thing. I moved my food around my plate. I got the point of Helson's stories, but I got the sense he'd thought we'd messed up Zan.